Welcome. We are delighted to have many people joining us from all corners of the world for today's webinar. This webinar is part of a series of webinars from the Transforming Children's Care Collaborative. The collaborative establishes more strategic, sector-wide collaboration from global to local levels, all aimed at strengthening children's care and care systems. We have more information. You can sign up at the link in the chat to join the platform and receive updates in the future. So if you aren't already signed up, we encourage you to do so. Okay, next slide, please. Housekeeping. So just so you know, this webinar will be recorded and made available, excuse me. So we hope you'll be able to listen and share with others who might not be able to join us today. My name is Kelly Bunkers, and I have the privilege of being your host today, and we'll be introducing you to our panelists in just a moment. Please do introduce yourselves using the panelists and attendees and sending a message so all of us can see it. And we also ask that you use the Q&A to comment and or make questions. We have left significant time at the end of this webinar or after the presentations to respond to questions. So please do put them there. Great. And we have a great schedule for you today. We are going to start with our colleague Khadija giving an overview of Kafaalah. Then Jane will present Kafaalah practice in Kenya. And then we have a wonderful panel discussion where our panelists will present on the practice of Kafaalah in Egypt, in Tanzania, and cross-border practice of Kafaalah, as well as Kenya. And then, as I mentioned, we will have a Q&A session. And after that, Florence Martin of the Better Care Network will give us some more information about interesting upcoming events. So again, I see lots of people are continuing to introduce themselves. Thank you so much. And now we will begin with an overview of the practice of Kafaalah by our colleague Khadija Karama. Khadija is the Deputy Director and Technical Lead for Changing the Way We Care in Kenya. She has over 20 years of experience in childcare and protection and has worked extensively with government and non-governmental organizations to strengthen care systems and promote family care. Khadija, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly, and all of us joining in today. And let's start up this webinar with a bit of a background on how this webinar came about. And the idea originally originated in Kenya after several key milestones in the country's care reform journey, and particularly efforts to recognize Kafaalah as an acceptable family-based care option. So when these experiences were shared within the Transforming Children's Care Collaborative, other countries expressed interest. So today's session has expanded to include multiple contexts and ideas of developing a community of practice around Kafaalah. Well, Kafaalah is deeply rooted in Islamic law, also known as Sharia. It has been practiced by Muslims worldwide for centuries. This allows a child deprived of parental care to be raised within, a loving family while maintaining the child's lineage and also inheritance rights. However, even though it is one of the oldest and most common form of family-based alternative care, kafala among the Muslims is often not formally recognized within national child protection systems. This limits oversight, monitoring, and support for children in such care arrangements. Furthermore, kafala is practiced differently in different contexts. There are contextual nuances in how it is implemented and understood. So for this purpose of today's webinar is threefold. First, to highlight the national efforts like those in Kenya to strengthening kafala and integrate into the legal and policy framework. Two, to explore cross-border implications where kafala placement may span countries. And finally, to bring together practitioners, policymakers, and faith leaders to share lessons and identify opportunities for collaboration in making kafala a well-supported, rights-based form of family alternative care. Next slide, please. So as we've understood the background of kafala, let's try to situate kafala within the international and child's rights instruments. To start it off, the Convention on the Rights of Children was the first globalized child rights agenda, affirming that every child deprived of their family environment has a right to alternative care. And in Article 20, explicitly recognizing Islamic kafala as one of the forms of such care. This recognition was a milestone. It formally placed kafala alongside foster care, kinship care with the global rights framework. Next is the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of Children, 1990,
It seems Hadija has frozen. So let me go ahead until she unfreezes and continue to present. As she was saying, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child affirms the right to alternative care, including culturally relevant care options. So whilst it doesn't specifically mention kafala, it is understood. The Hague Convention on Parental Responsibility and Measures for the Protection of Children of 1996 explicitly lists kafala among the protective measures for protection of children. The Convention on the Rights of People with Disability from 2008 doesn't explicitly name kafala, but it is implied in the wording of several articles. And the guidelines for the alternative care of children does include kafala among family-based options. Okay, next slide. So sorry that, okay, this is, are you back, Hadija? Please.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, some technical hitches. Thank you so much. So this slide, this graphic that we see on this slide highlights where kafala falls in the range of alternative care option. And this is particularly an example from Kenya. And just to also emphasize that in Kenya, the agenda of kafala and care reform at large was, in collaboration with the government, other state, non-state actors, and changing the way we care. But as we can see from this slide, it recognizes kafala as one of the family-based care options for children out of parental care. Unlike adoption, kafala does not create new legal parental relationship or inheritance right, but it ensures that a child grows up in a safe, nurturing family environment in line with the Islamic principles that protects the identity and the lineage of the child. Well, kafala fits squarely within the global child protection framework that prioritizes family-based care over institutional care. It promotes child's emotional and social well-being, helps them maintain community and cultural ties, and also aligns with both religious values and children's rights. As countries from reform foster care, kinship care, and family-based alternative care. Next slide. So the next slide just really points out some of the key terms that are commonly used within the Kafaalah practice. So I'll just pause for a second just for people to have a look at it, but I know we'll definitely interact with this a little bit more. But these are some of the common terms that we use when it comes to Kafaalah care option. So this concludes my presentation, and to take us to now hearing from practice, allow me to welcome, next slide please, Jen Munuhe. Jen is an Assistant Director for Children's Services within the Alternative Family Care Department in Kenya, State Department for Children's Services. Jen has over 17 years of experience in child protection and has been a driving force behind Kenya's care reform work and very instrumental in strengthening Kafaalah implementation. Jen, welcome.
Jane, you're on mute. Could you unmute, please?
Sorry. So thank you so much, Madam Khadija, for that very informative background on Kafaalah. And thank you for ushering me in. So good morning, good afternoon, participants. I'm happy to be part of this team. And I'm going to be taking us through this next session, focusing on Kafaalah practices in Kenya. And as you will realize, Kenya's care reform journey reflects deliberate efforts to strengthen the family-based care. And the integration of Kafaalah has been part of this effort that our country has made. As you can see from the slide that has been projected, the Kenya care reform effort started more than 2 decades, actually 2 decades ago. But recent efforts and interventions have seen care reform efforts go to an even newer level. Kindly go back to the slide, the previous slide. No, the previous one. Kindly go back to the first slide. Up. Yes, that is where we are. So I was saying, as you can see from these slides that has been projected, it's like Kenya's care reform effort. It started more than 2 decades ago, but there has been a lot of recent effort that have seen care reform move to the new levels it is today. And the current reform is underpinned under the National Care Reform Strategy, which is a 10-year strategy starting with from 2022 to 2032. And Kenya's care reform has been a progressive one. It has been an inclusive process, and it has been a process that seeks to ensure that every child is growing up in a safe and nurturing family environment. And among the key milestones of the reform is the establishment of the legal frameworks that recognizes and support family-based alternative care, which includes Kafaalah as one of the recognized alternative family-based care in this country. And the government, through the Ministry of Gender, Culture, and Children's Services, State Department for Children's Services, and in collaboration with the National Council for Children's Services, they have led the process of aligning the practice with both the national child protection legislation and international guidance, such as the UN guidelines, United Nations guidelines on Alternative Care, among other legislation. It is important to mention that the engagement of the religious leaders, the Qadhi's courts, has been very pivotal in this process. And it has ensured that the incorporation of kafala within the legal framework respect both the Muslim law and the child rights principles. You will realize that this inclusive process has increased the ownership and acceptance of care reforms among the Muslim community, where kafala is widely practiced as an act of religious and moral necessity. And overall, these milestones highlight the Kenya's growing recognition of kafala as a critical component of the country's range of family-based care options. And it reflects a harmonization between religious practice, a harmonization between the community participation, and a national child protection system. We move to the next slide. Yeah, this slide I'll talk about the milestones in Kenya's journey to bridge practice and the formal system. We are focusing on the kafala. And so it is important to note that the inherent strength of kafala, it places it as a critical component of the Kenya's range of family-based alternative care options. And the Kenyans' experiences over time, over years, is illustrated by several key milestones that were critical in ensuring kafala is effectively integrated into the national care reform agenda. As you can see from the year 2014, from this slide, when we were focusing on the legal framework that are supportive of kafala, in the year 2014, the Kenya domesticated the UN guidelines on alternative care through the guidelines for alternative family care in Kenya, whereby in this guideline, kafala is well elaborated. In the year 2018, the processes of embedding kafala in the legal legislation began through creating awareness and having dialogue between the child protection actors and the faith-based actors. And this laid the foundation for acceptance of kafala as a legitimate and family-based care option. And this engagement showed that community involvement is critical. And particularly the active participation of the community, the Muslim community, is essential again because of ownership and acceptance of the process. Same year, that is the year 2020, with the standard operating procedure developed in this country, we find that the inherent strength of kafala were recognized within the Kenya's national kafala framework. And the kafala was recognized as widely practiced by the Muslim community as both an act of religion and a moral necessity, underscoring that policy must reflect community realities and cultural practices. In the year 2021, as you can see from that slide, there was the aspect of data collection on existing kafala practice. And this was important because we realized kafala was practiced different by different Muslim communities. So we gathered that data. And in the year 2022, with now the data that had been collected, again with the development of the standard operating procedures on alternative family-based care, and these standard operating procedures provided procedures for all forms of alternative care. These confirm the importance of linking kafala to the broader care reform movement and the shift away from the institutional care to family and community-based care. And during this period, Kenya learned that engagement of Muslim leaders, the Qadhi's court, and the Muslim scholars in shaping the legislation and policy was critical, again, for acceptance and ownership and sustainability. So in the year 2023, as you can see, you will note that there were continued consultations and capacity building efforts, which was expanded. And the Kenya's experience highlighted the importance of training and collaboration between the faith-based and the statutory actors and other actors to ensure that kafala placement were both safe and right-based. And further to that, the establishment of the kafala committees, especially in the counties where kafala was being piloted, demonstrated that coordination between the regions and child protection structures was key to sustaining the process. And by 2024, as you can see, the draft kafala framework was formally recognized. It was validated, and it consolidated the role of kafala in Kenya's child protection and care system. And this also included the country seeing itself scaling up kafala in other counties. And as you will note that across this milestone, one clear lesson stands out, that the recognition of kafala in the Kenya's legal frameworks ensures that families and children under kafala receive the necessary support and protection they not only need, but which is also part of their right. And also we noted that when religion, when the community and the government systems work together, they create a faith-aligned, a culturally relevant, and a right-based approach to family care that strengthen the entire continuum of protection for the children. Let's move to the next slide. This slide is on the lessons that we have learned as a country throughout this process of care reform and embedding kafala into the child protection system. And you realize that the Kenya's journey shows that kafala is not only a religious or cultural practice, it is a formal, recognized care option, playing a significant role in supporting the end goal of child living in a safe and nurturing environment. And from Kenya's experience, several lessons have emerged. And one of the lessons includes that community engagement is essential. The active involvement of the Muslim communities has strengthened both ownership and acceptance of kafala as a legitimate care option. So that was one of the lessons that we've learned. Secondly, we have also learned that the participation of the Muslim leaders, of the Qadhi's court, and scholars in developing the legislation and policies about kafala has been critical for acceptance, sustainability, and also for the ownership. Another lesson that we have learned in this process is that legal recognition of kafala is foundational. Embedding the practice in the national legal framework ensures that children and families are supported and they're protected under the law. And finally, as a lesson learned, Kenya's journey shows that when the religious, when the community and the state systems work together, they create a culturally relevant, a faith-driven, and a child right-based care options that expands the continuum of family-based care. And these lessons reinforce that kafala is not only a religious or cultural practice, but it is also a formal, a rights-based pathway that strengthens Kenya's care reform agenda. And that is the end of my presentation, my session. Thank you so much for listening. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Jane. That was fantastic. And just a reminder to listeners, in the chat, there are links to the many useful documents, videos, training, programs that Kenya has developed in a very collaborative manner. So I encourage all of you to look at those. Thank you, Jane, for being such a champion. And now I'm delighted to begin our panel discussion. We will start with Hiba El-Azazi. Hiba is the Child Protection and Technical Advisor for Save the Children Egypt. She has over 12 years of experience in child protection and has worked closely with national counterparts on the implementation of Egypt's alternative care strategy, as well as authored a master's dissertation on Kafaalah family-based care arrangements in Egypt. Our first question for Hiba, but also for our other panelists, is how is Kafaalah understood and practiced in your context? How is it recognized in state law? And how is it different from other family-based care options, such as foster care or adoption? That's the first question. And the second question that Hiba will respond to is, what role do the religious and community leaders play in shaping discourse around and practice of Kafaalah in Egypt? Welcome, Hiba.
Thank you so much for your warm welcome, and I'm very happy to see some familiar faces in this webinar. So before I start answering your question, I would like to give you first an overview on the context of the alternative care in Egypt. So if we can go to the next slide. So in Egypt, there are currently approximately around 32,000 unaccompanied and separated children living in Egypt. Between them are 22,000 Egyptian children, where 10,000 are living in residential care institutions and about 12,000 are under the Kafaalah system. Again, all of these are approximate figures. Additionally, there are in Egypt around 10,000 unaccompanied separated children, refugees, and asylum seekers. However, at this point of time, they are not supported under the alternative care national system. Can you go to the next slide? So, in 2021, the Ministry of Social Solidarity launched an alternative care national strategy that aimed to offer the best alternative care services for children and youth deprived of parental care. The strategy focused mostly on deinstitutionalization, promoting family care over residential institutions. And when it comes to what are the long-term alternative care family-based options currently practiced in Egypt, so there is the kinship care, which is the placement of children with extended family members like grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Yet this is mostly kind of practiced informally, yet it could still be under the supervision of the Ministry of Social Solidarity. The most common type is the Kafaalah, and this has been originally and officially launched in Egypt since 1959 within the Ministry of Social Solidarity, and it has been practiced for a very long time. Yet, how Kafaalah is being currently practiced in Egypt, maybe I can, if you go to the next slide. So as my colleague Khadija has briefly mentioned previously, so the Egyptian law, in compliance with Sharia, allow non-biological families to care for abandoned orphan children without giving the child the same acknowledgement and the status of biological children. So what does this mean? It means that the child can be placed under the family care, yet they have to keep their original identity, meaning that they cannot have the exact full name as their caregiver, and they cannot inherit from the alternative caregiver. And this was distinguished Kafaalah from adoption, and adoption is prohibited in Egypt. So even in Egypt, Muslims and Christians who would like to care for children within an alternative care family setting, they have to go through the Kafaalah process that is supervised under the Ministry of Social Solidarity. So Also, one of the additional things around how kafala is being practiced is that currently, or over the past few years, the ministry has also trying to encourage families, alternative care families, to inform the children that they are caring for about their original identity and not to claim that they are their biological children, because that has been also the practice, that the families would tend to hide to the children and the community that they are caring for them through the kafala process. However, this kind of narrative has been trying to be changed over the past years to actually encourage and empower people to go and disclose that they are caring for children within the kafala system. In order for families to be able to apply for kafala, the government has put some eligibility criteria to allow who can apply for the kafala. So, for instance, the family has to have the same religious as the child. And this means, as I mentioned, that Muslim and Christians in Egypt can go and apply for the kafala procedures within the Ministry of Social Solidarity. And they also, based on the recent changes, they allowed that one of the parents can be non-Egyptian, but the rule is that one of them has to hold the Egyptian citizenship. Both parents or both caregiver, their age should be between 21 to 60 years old. And also based on some advocacy, the government also started to allow single women who are age 13 and above to also apply for kafala. And now maybe I can tell you more about the procedures of how the kafala process takes place. So actually, in order for a family to care for a child, these kafala families have to be vetted and approved by the Ministry of Social Solidarity. So they have to have a clean security record, and they also have to go through a very in-depth assessment that is being conducted by a social worker. And this assessment includes a home visit to the house of the applicant family, and they look at aspects related with their economic, health, social condition, and they try to have a comprehensive assessment around the eligibility or the capacity of this family to actually care for a child. Also, among the guidelines that the government has imposed recently is that they have to have drug tests and they have to have a mental health assessment as well. And after they submit all of these documents, a committee is formed in order to look at all of the aspects related to the family who is interested to apply for kafala, to decide on the eligibility of this family on whether they can care for a child or not. So this is briefly how kafala is being practiced in Egypt. Khalid, do you want me to proceed with the answering the role of the religious leaders and community leaders now?
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. So, in fact, the role of religious leaders was and community leaders was key into the changes that the government has pursued over the past few years. So, one of the key strengths of the Egypt National Strategy for alternative care was its inclusive approach. So actually, with the development of the strategy, religious leaders, active community members were engaged through the development of the strategy. And actually, they were consulted throughout the process. And this to ensure that the strategy aligned with culture and spiritual values and respond to the needs of kafala families and children. The collaboration with religious leaders was very critical because kafala, as an Islamic care model, it plays a central role in the alternative care system in Egypt. So actually, they have to have a say in it, and they played a very active role. So they were not just consulted. Actually, they have currently religious members, they have to have a seat within the committee that is responsible to select appropriate families for kafala. And this ensured that the decision reflect both child protection principles and also religious consideration. And in order to strengthen the role of religious leaders and ensure consistency in messaging around kafala in the Islamic dictates, so actually Save the Children and many other also entities worked on rolling out training for religious members to equip them with unified child-centered messages around kafala and alternative care. And this aimed to reduce inconsistency and promote best practices. So again, we try to ensure that also the information between religious leaders is consistent on how they interpret what is there in the Islamic dictates and how they can promote it among their own community. So also, in order to ensure again that a key role was also that prompt religious figures, they also helped into developing a content related with the Islamic dictates that is being that we are training kafala families on it. So again, this module helped that we also raise the awareness of community members and families who are applying for kafala to have correct understanding about what is there when it comes to the religious perspective around kafala practices. It also helped them to understand the religious aspect and responsibility and fostering informed and compassionate caregiving. But also it was also, we see it as kind of a weapon or like kind of a tool to help them to counter-argue any misinformation spread within the community about kafala. So it equipped the families to also be able to engage in community discussion if someone comes and says you are not practicing, for instance, kafala correctly. And now there's a module that prompt religious figures has developed it and is being kind of rolled out for all applicants who are interested to apply for kafala. One of the most interesting experience within the context in Egypt was the role of community member and community leader. So for many years, actually, kafala was very rarely discussed publicly in Egypt. It was very widely perceived as a sensitive and even a taboo topic. However, starting around 2019, some kafala families, they started to actually organize themselves, and they started to open up and share widely that they are caring for children through the kafala system. And this group started to give families a collective voice to express their needs and advocate for their rights with the government. So they started to engage directly with the Ministry of Social Solidarity and pushing for expanding rights for children and families under kafala. And honestly, their approach was very, very welcomed with the ministry. And honestly, they started to adopt some of the changes based on the family request to make the process easier for them and for the children. So one major achievement was also their involvement in policy development. So when the ministry was trying to draft the law on alternative care, they kind of consulted not only with the religious leaders, as I mentioned previously, but they also consulted with some of these kafala family representatives, and they also were keen to hear from children as well, who are deprived of parental care. And this is a milestone for participatory policymaking. Also, what we saw is that families applying for kafala started to form a lot of peer network support, and they use these channels through Facebook, through a lot WhatsApp communication to share information around kafala, to also provide support group to each other and guide each other throughout this complex process for kafala. So they were there for each other, providing information, providing tips, even after the families would manage to take that child and care for them. Whenever they would face any challenges, they would still have or engage with each other for community support. They didn't stop here as well. They succeeded in shedding lights on the kafala, a notion in itself, through social media campaign and TV discussion. So as I mentioned before, it was a topic that rarely being discussed within social media, or rarely that people would come and disclose. But with the effort of these community initiatives, we started to find more people encouraged to come out and discuss kafala. And there was media series that were made on the topic that actually helped to generate more interest from many families. And honestly, this generated a lot of interest during the past couple of years for more families to apply for kafala, as it normalized the notion of kafala and contributed to reduce the stigma. And finally, some families started to actually establish some civil society organization and they started to partner with national entities, and this to institutionalize the support for kafala families and ensuring sustainability and stronger advocacy. I will conclude in 1 minute. Actually, all of the efforts that were done and exerted by these community members were very much encouraged and by the Ministry of Social Solidarity. So I remember during one of the interviews I had with them, they were acknowledging that through the effort of community members, they managed to succeed new segment from the population that the ministry was not able to reach them before, and they managed to reach a wider community. So, and that's it from my side, and happy to answer your question later on.
Oh, Hiba, thank you so much. I think this information from Egypt, it just really illuminates the importance and the benefit, I think, of bridging what is often informal practice with formal processes. And I especially love hearing about the advocacy of those with lived experience. So huge thanks, Hiba. That was great. And moving on, our next panelist, I'm delighted to introduce Kokuteta Barego, who is the Executive Director of Akama Development Foundation in Tanzania. She has 20 years of experience across Egypt and East and Southern Africa, and has led programs focused on child protection, violence prevention, and empowerment. So again, Koku, just starting with the question about the context, and then the second question, perhaps you can provide some recommendations that you would put forth to strengthen kafala in both mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar. Thank you, Koku.
Right, thank you so much for this session. It's been very, very fruitful. I will talk about just a few things because Tanzania doesn't have all that experience to share, but I believe that these are very fundamental things that we can learn also from this side. Basically, Tanzania has a lure system of law. So it's not just one kind of law, but several. So we have traditional laws, we have Christian laws, we have Islam laws. So it's a mixed kind of community that even in terms of designing laws, it's a little bit complicated. And because of that, in fact, Tanzania mainland has a different system, because in that part of the country is a lot of, it has different cultures mixed. And Zanzibar, on the other hand, is a little bit different. That the majority of the population in Zanzibar are Islam. So it's easier to design a law that can guide the community. But what we're learning also from Zanzibar is also, but there's some problems that we can actually identify that we can solve if we take time to think about it. But because there's a lot of Islams also in Tanzania mainland who may benefit from this system. So these laws are children, marriage, divorce, inheritance, guardianship, child maintenance. So it's quite a number of laws that actually guide that community that also might need also community can have impact on the other part of the country. In terms of institutionalizing or progress, Zanzibar has progressed a lot in terms of kafala. Believing that it's something that is also it's a moral obligation, but so legal obligation, but so community also obligation. Tanzania has legislation. Since 2011, we've actually legitimized kafala, so it is actually in the law. And this actually, this becomes very, very important for people who are actually practicing this, because they know how they have to behave and how to where to go when they get problems and things like that. But also in terms of legislation, we don't only have a law that governs the community, but also the institutions. Like we have the law courts, These courts are the courts basically that lead all both the development of the law itself, because they can actually contribute to the development of the law itself, if or when they actually do it with the Chief Justice. But also they do it through case law. So in terms of making legislations and also case law, it is being developed different ways, and this definitely will contribute to the changes in the law over the years. And so far, there's a lot of laws that have been made through case law. But the only problems that we have at the moment is that we don't have enough evidence to show that this is actually making a difference in the lives of communities, in the different communities. But also the other thing that they're doing is that institutionalizing kafala. Kafala used to be practiced in the community without any kind of guidance. Well, there was guidance, because people in communities actually agree. They agree on certain things, but it is written and it is guided. So right now they have institutions that actually train cadis. Now cadis have both the experience, but they also the knowledge. And this also this will support the development of kafala practice. Apart from the training institutions, the other is the courts. The courts in the Tanzania mainland does not have kadhi courts, but in Zanzibar they have court system that takes kadhis. So which means that even in terms of changes in the legislature, the judiciary, that will lead to changes also in the structure of the judiciary. The other thing that is development within the kafala system is that there's stages in order to moving from kafala to adoption. So the law has conditions or minimum conditions that has to be met in order to be able to provide those that to serve the service, but also to move on from the kafala system to the adoption system. What we're learning also is that one cannot has an option, or the child also has an option to remain in the system, in the kafala system, or they can move to adoption system, both for the parents and the child. So in Tanzania, there's a lifetime that a child has to live within a kafala system to stay in order to be able to move on to the adoption system. So what does it mean? Is that there are fundamental changes when that moves from that moves to the other. In terms of the name, they cannot, like I think they've said about the others, about the kafar, the Khadija and Jane. One moves not just identity, but also the name. So they have a right now to change their names. They can also, not only that, the concept of kafala also does not mean, that leaves meaning, that does not mean anything else anymore, because now even connection with the biological parents or biological relatives it can be, can cease. In issues of inheritance, while in the kafala system, the child still has the right to inherit. In the adoption system, she or he cannot inherit. But once she moves or he moves into the adoption system, she has full system, she has right to adopt. So there's a fundamental changes in these two systems. Now, there are problems with that in terms of the concept of kafala that we can actually adopt also from the adoption system. The fact that the relationship or communication with the biological families and that is also is a problem. The only thing that we have in the law is that the law allows the relatives to be the person who cares for the child, or the kafala, which takes care of the kafala. So eventually she becomes, or he becomes, a biological parent, and therefore the rights falls into that child's. But the problem is when the person who takes the kafala child falls into other hands. But definitely, it's also, there are many problems that have been documented about this, also this system. That once
1 minute, Koku. 1 minute left.
Okay. All right. Just to conclude, I think it's just that the recommendations are clear. If we can actually change the systems a little bit to allow the child to actually communicate to the biological parents or biological families is important, but also to allow the non-biological parents to engage in this system. Also, the need also to research about what is happening on the ground. We've learned about so much about what is done, why it is, what is good, what is being practiced, and all that. But whether it is actually good or not, I don't think we have enough for us to actually use it as a system. So probably more research to learn a little bit more. Could be country-based, but something needs to be done. But thank you so much, Kelly.
Excellent. Thank you, Kokette. Thank you very much. And now moving on to Jeanette Wallenstein, who is a child rights specialist with over 10 years of experience in child protection, alternative care, and kafala. Jeanette has co-authored a major comparative study on kafala and contributes regularly to global expert discussions on the matter, notably addressing private international law issues related to the recognition and enforcement of kafala in other jurisdictions. And I'm going to tweak the first question, Jeanette, just a little bit, because we'd love to hear from you specifically about cross-border kafala, including things that you have recently learned and how it's practiced and how it is recognized in state laws. And then the second question, what are key cross-border challenges in implementing kafala, especially in cases involving migration or displacement of children? So Jeanette, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for this nice introduction and welcome. Based on ISS research, let me briefly define what we mean by cross-border kafala. We identified two main scenarios. One refers to situations where a kafala decision taken in one state must be recognized abroad at a later stage. Or we have the second scenario where kafala is established directly between two states from its inception. These cross-border placements, they may be intra-family, for example, with relatives in diaspora communities often, or extra-family with families not related to the child. We see that these placements are increasing in number, and they can, of course, hold several benefits, such as ensuring continuity of culture, religion, language, and identity, while also offering the possibility to grow up in a family environment for children who are less likely to benefit from family-based care in their national context, such as older children, children with disabilities or special needs, sibling groups. However, in practice, we see a big complexity surrounding these cross-border placements, as they sit really at the crossroads between family law, private international law, human rights law, child protection, and immigration, and practice varies greatly from one state to another. Importantly, as stressed by many of my colleagues, kafala is not adoption, so it does not create a new legal parentage. For this reason, it is excluded from the 1993 Hague Convention, which deals with intercountry adoption matters, and instead it falls under the 1996 Hague Convention, which provides a mechanism for cooperation and recognition. And finally, we have significant international and regional case law that has recognized kafala as a child protection measure under international standards, and has also touched upon the question of how kafala can be recognized abroad. Moving on now to the next slide and your second question about the challenges we do observe. Please let me start with some of the positive trends we have also observed. So first, there is a strong awareness of issues at stake. So authorities are recognizing the problems caused by weak monitoring and the lack of follow-up, especially in cross-border settings. Second, and as we have heard from previous colleagues, national legal and policy frameworks are slowly being consolidated, and more attention is paid to safeguards such as evaluation, preparation of families and children, and systematic follow-up of placements. Third, civil society organizations have been very active and pushing for change and advocating for the rights of the Makful children. We also see important learnings that we can draw from the field of adoption, but also from alternative care more broadly, including by young people and adults who share their lived experiences, which we can apply and adapt actually to Kafaalah. And finally, there's a strengthened cooperation between states with stricter conditions for cross-border Kafaalah placements. And these questions are now also regularly discussed in international fora, such as at the Hague Conference on Private International Law, as well as brought to the attention of the CRC committee. So the direction we are seeing is really encouraging. Next slide, please. At the same time, there are major challenges that still need to be addressed. From a legal and policy perspective, the 1996 Hague Convention, which is this key international instrument, is still underused. Many authorities are not familiar with its procedures, its recognition modalities. They remain unclear. So safeguards are not applied consistently across countries. Also, the number of Sharia law states that have ratified that convention remains low, calling really for a greater promotion of this instrument. There's also no harmonized approach to Kafaalah in terms of legal pathways, but also on how to treat the legal effects of Kafaalah across jurisdictions, especially in those which do not recognize or know Kafaalah as a child protection measure. Each country interprets it differently. In Belgium, you can, for example, see a specific form called adoption Kafaalah. In France, it takes the form of recueil légal. Germany treats it like a long-term foster care combined with guardianship, and Spain also deals with it as a permanent foster care placement. In some countries, there's also the possibility of converting Kafaalah into adoption after a certain lapse of time. And so this patchwork really makes it extremely difficult to ensure continuity of protection of children across borders. Immigration and residence rights are another major challenge. Children under Kafaalah often face a precarious legal situation in the receiving state with uncertain access to services, nationality, or long-term stability. And on the practical side, there is a lack of reliable data. So monitoring and follow-up are often weak, as I said, across borders. And private or unsupervised arrangements still occur, and in some cases, financial contributions or intermediaries play also a role, which undermines, of course, the principle of Kafaalah serving the child's best interests. And finally, cooperation between authorities remains limited in practice. Immigration and child protection authorities often struggle to coordinate, and roles and responsibilities are not always clear. So this really underlines the importance of further awareness raising as well as prevention. Kafaalah must really respond to the needs of children, and we must recall that there is not the right to have a child, which is often something we hear still in this context. So safeguards, subsidiarity, and addressing stigma are really essential in this context. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Jeanette. That was really excellent. And we have been monitoring the questions. I'll get to some of those. Just want to remind people that the webinar is being recorded and will be shared. And there are links to different documents mentioned by our presenters in the chat. So please do follow that. Okay, I am going to ask a question to Hadija and Hiba. If you could both give short responses to this question, please. What kinds of support are being provided by the state to families and children in kafala care situations. Hiba, do you want to take the first response, and then we can turn it over to Hadija?
So the Egyptian government does not provide any compensation for these families. So they wanted to ensure that families applying for kafala are doing it out of desire and out of a deep need for that, or like that they want to do that, and they are not looking for any compensation. So one of the criteria to ensure that the family is eligible to apply for kafala is to ensure that they have a regular income that could cover the need of that child. So there is very minimal support that the government provide for the family after they do the placement of the child within the family. They just monitor the situation, intervene if there is any safeguarding issue or if there is any problem. Sometimes they would step in if, for instance, the child needs a surgery and medical support and the family cannot cover it, but they do not provide coverage for education, or they do not provide the family with any financial compensation, just to be brief.
Excellent. Thanks, Hiba. And Hadija, or perhaps Jane, if you could respond in terms of any state support provided in Kenya.
Would you like to respond to that?
Okay, it is okay, Khadija. Just like the first speaker has said, placement of a child under kafala in Kenya, it follows a case management process. The aspect of child assessment to establish the need of the child, and the family assessment to establish the strength of the families and the need of the family, determines the kind of interventions that we come up with. So placement is through that process. So the government does not give a blank support to all the children, all the families that are taking in children under kafala, but all the same, if a family is found to be eligible for enrollment into the social protection program, the family is enrolled. Currently, the government is in the process of establishing the Child Welfare Fund, and it's through this fund that families that are taking children under alternative care will be benefiting, of which kafala will be part of it. And I know the government is working in collaboration with other key players. So there are other complementary services that families get from those other key players. Yes, that is Kenya.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane. And another question for Hiba. We had a couple of questions, so I'm combining them. But if you could perhaps address or share how stigma is addressed from a systems perspective. You had mentioned that issue, and so maybe provide some more details on how stigma specifically has been addressed. Thanks, Hiba.
Okay, so someone also was asking why there's a stigma. So briefly to also highlight, so there's the stigma because the notion, these children deprived of parental care are usually looked as that they are abandoned children, or that they are children born out of wedlock. Unfortunately, this is the perception around children deprived of parental care. And it's not the same for orphans, where they know that their parents were, for instance, passed away. So this is the main notion. What the government, in order to address that, they started to play a bit with some terminology, even within the law. So some of the terminologies in Arabic, where in itself, the terminology was stigmatizing. So in the new strategies and in the law, draft law, they started to change this terminology. They also started to as I mentioned, the involvement of religious leaders and the community leaders also contributed into shifting this position or this notion around stigmatization, because the family started to proudly come out and discuss that and say that they are looking for children. And the government actually mobilized on that and ensured to actually use what is being said in the media and promote the idea further and further through sometimes the support even of the president of Egypt. So all of that is an attempt to actually combat the stigma that is associated around children who are deprived of parental care.
Great, thanks, Hiba. Okay, I'm looking at one more. Jeanette, there is a question from one of the participants who recently wrote an article. The preliminary conclusion was based on literature about kafala in various countries, and whether or not kafala should be recognized as an adoption, because the child will not legally become a child of the kafil, as is the case with adoption. How do you, Jeanette, reflect on this? Is this according to your experience? Does this correspond in general with the legal perspective of kafala? Jeanette.
Yes, this question, of course, opens a long discussion and debate. So I'm not sure I can answer it in an extremely succinct manner. What we at ISS try to promote is really to adopt a delicate balance between respecting the initial measure that was taken in a Sharia law country that relates to kafala, but then also ensuring that once the child is on the territory of the receiving state, has access to all rights and services as any child on that territory. So, and this is where the question about conversion into adoption, assimilation into adoption kicks in, which is legally extremely complex, because when you look at adoption, you would need to look also into consent. Can a birth mother in the state of origin actually consent to an adoption if her law prohibits adoption? So there are extremely complex legal questions that arise that many states have not yet solved within their national legal systems and mechanisms. What we need, however, to take into account is that we prevent disguised intercountry adoptions from happening, where the intention from the beginning was to actually adopt that child. And then we are talking about situations where the international standards, which are in the 1993 Hague Convention, are then actually not complied with. So voilà, this is just a few considerations, maybe as a first step of an answer, but I'm more than happy to exchange with the colleague that asked those specific questions, because it's extremely complex. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. And I would just encourage participants, such as whomever wrote this question, if you have documents such as that article to share, please share the links in the chat. We are very interested in learning more, and I think as a step of perhaps creating a community of practice, that might be a wonderful first step. I have one more question, and I'm going to ask Hadija to respond to this one. Is kafala always used as a family-based care option, or are there contexts where it's also used to support children in residential care? And if that's the case, what are some approaches to standardize these different forms of care? Hadija.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, so really bringing us back to Kenya and what we have seen. And yes, there's a situation where we have what we call sponsorship, where someone sends their support to an institution where children are actually accessing, for example, education. So the funds go into that institution, and that one looks like institutional, kafala, where children are being supported in an institutional care setting, and the kafil or the sponsors are actually channeling in their resources to support children in that setup. But then we also have other example where we have institutional support, but then this institution has changed to actually support children in community setup. So those are some of the efforts that we are trying to push forward, and probably have examples which can be used to be extended to other institutions offering institutional kind of kafala setup. And these are conversations that needs to happen within the policy framework and even people who are actually sponsoring those institutions, such that we can still use institution to receive funds, but instead of those children staying in those institutions for education support, these children are actually taken back to their families. They come in to get that support, but also beyond education, they are able to get other additional support within their family setup. And we have those examples here in Kenya, and to be very specific, in Malindi, that is forming as one of the a model that we are actually promoting, and that model can also be found in one of the national Kafala implementation framework that is yet to be officially launched in Kenya. That can be found as a case study in that document. And quickly, probably Kelly, just to answer this question, yes, Kafala can be both temporary and permanent. So we can place a child in a temporary sort of kafala setup as we address to ensure that this child either goes back to their original family to continue living and they receive support from an external sponsor, but it can also be someone who probably has lost both parents and have decided to take in that child, with a caveat that we are not going to change the name of the child, and also not, issues of inheritance comes in. So that's why it is really different from adoption from an Islamic perspective. Yeah, thanks, and back to you, Kelly.
Excellent. Thanks, Hadija. You actually answered another question about the possibility of reunification. So well done. I wonder, Jeanette, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but there is a question here about in how many countries kafala is practiced. I don't know if you have that number offhand, but perhaps just to give an example of how many countries your study included, as just a small kind of glimpse at the number.
Of course, in our study of 2020, we looked at around 11 to 14. I must say, I forgot the number now. 11 to 14 country contexts, where we studied a few more extensively than others. For others, we could only provide a snapshot. And then we looked at around 10 recognition systems to really look also at the cross-border dimensions of kafala. So in that study, you will see about 20 country contexts and practices reflected. And of course, take into account that it's a study from 2020, so some of the data and statistics might now be outdated. And as we have heard, Egypt has moved a long way, as has Kenya. So yeah, it's just to be taken into account. But I think the issue is also when it's being practiced, often it's a community-based solution. It's rather informal in nature. So we lack then also data on how it is effectively practiced and what are the profile of children that are being placed in such informal arrangements often. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Jeanette, very much. Okay, recognizing we are running out of time, I'd like to invite Florence, the Executive Director of Better Care Network, to share a few words about next steps.
Thank you, Kelly. And first of all, a huge thank you to the speakers, the amazing speakers that have provided really rich presentation, and to you, Kelly, for amazing moderation. This is a webinar that we've been very excited about. There's been a lot of discussion about it. And as Khadija highlighted at the beginning, there has been discussion about how this is just a start of a conversation. There are many there's so much information, and there's many more conversation that needs to happen among communities, both of practitioners who are working around Kafaalah, but also those working in countries where broader care reforms is happening. It's clear from what we've heard today, Kafaalah is a fundamental practice, a historical practice among Muslim communities that provide family-based alternative care, but it also looks very different in different contexts. And understanding that diversity, understanding the complexities that have been highlighted by Jeanette and others around its relationship to adoption, the question around inter-country relations and dealing with the question of Kafaalah and how that applies to children and families, all of this requires a lot more thinking. But the recognition of Kafaalah as an important form of alternative care and how that needs to be integrated into efforts to reform care system is clearly happening in a number of countries. So Khadija mentioned at the start of this webinar that there is interest by many of the actors that participated in this webinar, but also others, to have a community of practice under the Transforming Children's Care to discuss Kafaalah and share learning, share evidence, identify common problems and challenges. So we would encourage you, if you're interested in being part of this community, to reach out. We've provided a contact email, and some of these amazing leaders that you heard today will be starting to set up a task force or a community of practice under the TCC to start sharing and identifying what are the issues that they may want to discuss. Secondly, we will, of course, share a link to the webinar recording, the slides, the final reports, and again, further links, the video, practitioner video from Kenya that has been mentioned, that also provides amazing learning from the practitioner who were involved in those efforts, including Khadija. I would recommend you watching this, and also other resources that have been mentioned. There's going to be a survey that will appear once the webinar ends, so please help us make webinars better. And also thank you for your patience with some of the technical issues we faced today. You can find more information if you're not familiar with the Transforming Children's Care Collaborative in the chat as well, where we've provided the link. So again, colleagues, thank you so much. We're really excited by the learning and by your enthusiasm as well in engaging with these complex issues and important issues. And we look forward to you joining both, hopefully, the community of practice and also the further webinars that are coming up. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Florence and team, for hosting us. And thanks to all of our participants and all of those who joined us today. Thanks so much. And please do go visit those links that we shared. Lots of interesting documentation, videos, etc. So thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening or the rest of your day.
Thank you, and bye-bye.